the economy feels, well, deeply confusing right now, you're definitely not alone.
Hmm.
Official numbers might say inflation is sort of cooling off, but every time we go shopping, fill the car, pay bills, it feels like everything just costs more. Much more.
That's right. And that gap, that confusion between the headlines and, what's actually in your wallet, that's exactly why we're doing this today.
Right.
We've gathered a bunch of sources, polls, government reports like from the CEA, economic analyses from places like the Yale Budget Lab, the Tax Foundation.
Serious stuff?
Yeah, serious stuff. Our mission is really to cut through the noise and figure out the actual impact of these huge policy shifts we've seen in the last, 9 months?
Massive tariffs, big tax changes, this deregulation push.
Exactly. We want to synthesize what all this actually means for households, for global trade, for you.
Okay, let's dive straight into that central tension then, this economic anxiety gap. Because the data really seems to show official inflation isn't telling the whole story.
It really doesn't seem to be. I mean, look at this Harris poll for The Guardian from back in October 2025. It painted a pretty clear picture.
Pessimistic.
Very. 75% of Americans reported soaring prices. 3/4. That's a huge number feeling the pinch.
And it wasn't just a feeling, right? They got specific about the money.
They did. A clear majority said their monthly household costs went up somewhere between $100 and $749 every single month.
Wow. That range, $100 to $750, that's exactly where things get incredibly tight for most families.
Precisely. But then, here's the kicker, as you said, the official overall inflation rate. Almost flat. It nudged down from 3% annually in January 25 to 2.9% in August.
So 0.1%, which is basically nothing when your bills are up hundreds of dollars.
Exactly. It's technically cooling. But that tiny statistical shift means absolutely nothing to someone staring at, say, an extra $500 in monthly expenses. It just doesn't compute.
So if it's not overall inflation driving this feeling, where's the pain point? I know your sources pointed somewhere specific, something that lines up with that dollar range people reported.
They really do. And this is where the new trade policy seems to hit home hard. The Yale Budget Lab did a calculation.
Okay.
They estimated that households will see an average cost increase of about $2,300 a year, just from the new tariffs alone.
Right. So break that down monthly?
It's about $191 a month,
Yeah.
which lands, smack dab in the middle of that $100 and $749 window people were reporting.
So it suggests the tariffs, specifically, might be fueling a big chunk of this pocketbook crisis, maybe more directly than broader inflation right now.
That seems to be a strong possibility, yes. And what's fascinating, or maybe worrying, is how universal this anxiety is.
It cuts across party lines.
Absolutely. When pollsters asked about the biggest risk to the U.S. economy, inflation was number one for Republicans, 31%, and independents, 33%. And it was number two, but very close, for Democrats at 29%.
So everybody's feeling it. Economic anxiety is the great unifier right now.
Really seems to be.
Yet it feels like the policies getting pushed through are kind of disconnected from what people actually say they want. We saw polling that showed support for things like expanding the child tax credit or banning price gouging on food.
Yeah, both polled around 45% support.
Mm-hmm.
Those are traditionally more Democratic-aligned policies, holding popularity even after the administration change.
Right. But then you look at the current administration's big agenda items.
And it's the opposite. Some of the most aggressive policies were among the least popular. Those new tariffs, only 22% support. The big tax cuts, also 22%. Mass deportation, just 24%.
So there's this really profound disconnect. The policies being enacted aren't the ones polling well at all.
Not even close. It seems the governing agenda is actively pursuing things a large chunk of Americans across the board really don't like.
Okay, let's really focus in on those tariffs then, because the scale you mentioned, it's not just tweaking things. It sounds historic.
Oh, it's absolutely a paradigm shift. Forget the targeted steel tariffs from before. We're talking about something completely different.
How different?
Between January and April 2025, so really fast, the average applied U.S. tariff rate, it shot up from about 2.5% to an estimated 27%.
27%. That's
the highest level in over a century. It settled back a bit to around 17.9% by September, but still, that initial jump, the speed and the level are just astronomical.
And the sheer amount of trade it covers, you mentioned that too.
Right. The first Trump administration's tariffs, they affected maybe $380 billion worth of imports. This time, the administration slapped duties on $2.3 trillion of goods.
Trillion?
Yeah.
Wow.
That covers something like 71% of all goods we import. 71%.
Okay, so the cost impact must be equally massive then.
The projections are staggering. S&P Global estimated companies would spend an extra $1.2 trillion in 2025 just because of this.
1.2 trillion.
And researchers calculated that about two-thirds of that shock, so over $900 billion, is expected to land directly on American consumers and the businesses importing the goods.
Which brings us right back to that $2,300 per household number from Yale. It all starts to connect.
It lines up almost perfectly, yeah.
Now, your sources mentioned something about how these were put in place so quickly. It wasn't the usual long process through Congress.
No, not at all. They moved incredibly fast by using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEPA.
IEPA. Okay, what's that normally for? Sounds serious.
It is. It's usually for things like sanctioning hostile countries, freezing terrorist assets, that kind of thing. Real national security emergencies.
So how did they use it for tariffs?
By declaring the trade deficit itself a national emergency. This allowed the president to basically act unilaterally, bypassing all the complex trade negotiations and congressional hoops you'd normally have to jump through.
Declared an emergency and imposed tariffs.
Essentially, yes, and it's highly controversial. Legal experts, outlets like the New York Times, they immediately call it out as a massive overreach of executive power.
Arguing the emergency was sort of made up.
Pretty much. That it was concocted, as the Times put it, just to justify these sweeping duties. It's such a big legal question that the Supreme Court actually scheduled a review for this November 2025.
Okay, wow. And tied into this tariff strategy, there was this other thing. Really technical, but it affects almost everyone who shops online. The de minimis loophole.
Ah, yes. De minimis. Latin for basically too small to worry about.
Right.
For years, it meant packages valued under $800 could come into the U.S. without facing customs duties or a lot of paperwork.
So like my cheap phone case from overseas or fast fashion orders, that stuff.
Exactly. And it overwhelmingly benefited those giant Chinese e-commerce platforms, Shein, Temu, AliExpress, had super cheap fast shipping.
And now?
It is. After some back and forth, closing it for some countries, reopening it because customs got swamped,
Yeah.
they finally used that same emergency law, the IEPA, to close the $800 exemption globally. That was August 29th, 2025.
What was the immediate effect?
Chaos, basically.
Yep.
International shippers in Europe, Asia.
Yeah.
Many had to just suspend deliveries to the U.S. because nobody was sure how to handle the sudden regulatory change. Customs was instantly gridlocked.
Just massive disruption. And looking ahead, the specific tariff proposals are pretty intense too, right? Pharmaceuticals, semiconductors.
Extremely intense. We're talking proposals like 200% on imported medicines, though they did put in a year-long grace period for that one. And 100% on semiconductors.
100% on chips.
Yeah.
But there was a catch there.
Yes, a big one. An exemption for companies that commit to building new manufacturing plants in the U.S. They explicitly mention Apple as the kind of company that might qualify.
Interesting. How did other countries react to all this?
Swiftly. China retaliated pretty hard, raising its baseline tariff on U.S. goods to 125%. And they basically said they'd ignore any further U.S. increases.
So, trade war escalating.
Seems like it. But interestingly, other countries like Singapore and the Philippines set up task forces. Some analysts even suggested these high U.S. tariffs could, maybe paradoxically, make those countries more competitive alternatives for sourcing goods.
Unintended consequences. Okay, so that's the tariff shockwave. But the administration also pushed through something huge on the tax side. Let's shift gears entirely. We need to talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA.
Right, the OBBBA. Quite a name.
It is. And its main function was basically extending most of the big 2017 tax cuts. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA. Those were set to expire.
Correct. And extending those cuts is, well, it's a massive fiscal decision. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, estimates it adds about $4.6 trillion to the national debt over 10 years.
$4.6 trillion.
That's the CBO number. Some leading economists actually put it even higher, possibly over $5 trillion.
That kind of debt increase is a huge concern, especially with inflation worries still around.
It absolutely is. And there's a pretty strong consensus among economists, across the political spectrum, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that extending tax cuts of this size will likely boost inflationary pressures, and it will definitely worsen America's fiscal trajectory.
No.
So the policy adds potentially trillions to the debt and might actually fuel the very inflation causing the anxiety we started with.
It seems counterintuitive, but the original goal, or the stated goal, of the 2017 TCJA was supposedly helping average working families. When we look at the data, who actually got the biggest benefits from those cuts that just got extended?
Well, it depends heavily on how you slice the data. If you look
Yeah.
purely at federal effective tax rates, that's the actual percentage of income someone pays in federal income tax.
Okay.
The data from, say, 1980 to 2019 does show that rates fell quite a bit for the bottom 80% of earners, the bottom 4 quintiles. The very bottom quintile, the poorest 20%, saw their effective federal income tax rate drop massively, like 93%.
93% reduction. Wait, that sounds enormous. If the poorest Americans saw that kind of cut, how can critics claim the policy mainly benefited the rich and worsened inequality? That sounds like it helped the bottom end hugely.
But that's the crucial nuance, and it's where the debate gets really heated. Critics argue that focusing only on federal income tax is, well, misleading. A shell game, some call it.
Why? What does it ignore?
It ignores other major forms of taxation that disproportionately benefit the wealthiest people. Think about taxes on capital gains profits from selling stocks or assets, or inheritance taxes, or various real estate tax breaks.
Okay, so things that primarily benefit people with significant wealth and investments, not just wage earners.
Exactly. The argument is, while the income tax rate for lower earners might have dropped a bit on paper, may be helped by things like the doubled standard deduction, which OBBBA also extended.
Right, that went up to $24,000 for married couples.
Correct. So that helps some families. But the core features of the TCJA that really drive long-term wealth accumulation, like slashing the corporate tax rate to a flat 21%, those overwhelmingly benefit corporations and their shareholders, who are predominantly wealthy.
So the critique is that by structuring the cuts this way, focusing benefits on capital rather than just labor income, the policy ultimately cements or even increases wealth inequality, regardless of that flashy 93% drop in the income tax rate for the lowest earners.
That's precisely the argument. It favored capital over labor in a way that locks in advantages for the already wealthy.
And just quickly, OBBA also kept the penalty for not having health insurance under the Affordable Care Act at zero, right?
Yes, it extended that. An analysis suggests that zeroing out the individual mandate penalty tends to increase insurance premiums for everyone else and likely reduces the number of people with health coverage overall. Another potential cost pressure point for households.
Okay, so we've got tariffs potentially raising costs by $2,300 a year, and tax cuts potentially adding trillions to the debt while maybe fueling inflation. Now let's look at the other side of the ledger, the administration's big counterargument. Deregulation.
Right. This is where they claim the benefits are flowing to households. They rely heavily on analysis from the Council of Economic Advisors, the CEA.
And the CEA made some pretty big claims.
Very big. A key report argued that all the deregulation efforts since 2017 were on track to eventually raise real annual incomes by about $3,100 per household.
$3,100. Okay, that's more than the estimated tariff cost.
Exactly. That's the narrative counterweight. In aggregate, they projected this deregulation dividend would be worth about $380 billion annually across the economy once the effects fully kicked in over 5 to 10 years.
So they're essentially saying, yes, tariffs might cost you $2,300, but our deregulation is saving or giving you $3,100, so you're net positive. They must have specific examples for that $3,100 claim.
They do. They argued that the total savings from these actions were already around $220 billion per year for consumers and businesses. They even claimed this was larger in aggregate than the economic benefits from historically huge deregulations, like in airlines and trucking back in the day.
Okay, so where are these savings supposedly coming from? Let's break it down. Internet costs.
Yeah, they pointed to overturning an FCC broadband privacy rule. This is a rule that required internet providers to get your opt-in consent before sharing your data.
I remember that.
Right. The CEA claimed that getting rid of that rule led to lower prices for both wired and wireless internet service. They estimated the savings at about $40 per subscriber per year.
$40. So the trade-off was less privacy for a slightly lower bill?
That's the implication, yes.
Okay. What about healthcare? That's always a huge cost center.
Here they focused on FDA actions aimed at boosting competition for generic drugs. Things like the Drug Competition Action Plan.
Did it work?
According to the CEA, yes. They found that retail prescription drug prices fell more than 11% below what the previous trend predicted. They estimated this saved consumers around $32 billion a year.
$32 billion is significant, especially for drug costs. Okay, what else? Banking.
Yes, they cited the CREPO bill. That law rolled back some of the Dodd-Frank regulations specifically for smaller and regional banks.
Why focus on smaller banks?
Because those community banks do a disproportionate amount of lending to small businesses. The thinking was easing their regulatory burden regulations designed more for the too-big-to-fail giants would free them up to lend more efficiently. The CEA estimated this would generate about $6 billion in annual real income gains, presumably through more business activity.
Makes sense. And finally, labor regulations.
Correct. They highlighted reversing several Obama-era rules, things like the Persuader Rule, which dealt with union organizing, and also rules that expanded the definition of a joint employer.
How does rolling those back save money?
The argument is reduce compliance costs for businesses, less paperwork, fewer potential legal liabilities. The CEA estimated these reversals would save about $45 billion per year in real income, which theoretically gets passed on through lower prices or higher wages or boosts business investment.
Theoretically. Okay.
Hashtag tag outro.
So if we try to, pull all these threads together, I think you can really see why the economy feels so contradictory right now. It's because it is.
Yeah.
You've got these two massive, powerful, and frankly, competing economic strategies hitting the system at the same time.
Right. On one hand, you have protectionism, the tariffs, and fiscal expansion through the tax cut extensions. Both seem to actively increase household costs or at least create serious inflationary risks and add to the national debt.
Exactly. And that strategy is running head-on into the second one, this widespread deregulation across tech, healthcare, finance, labor.
Which the administration via the CEA claims is doing the opposite, lowering consumer costs, boosting competition, and delivering thousands of dollars in maybe less visible annual benefits. Precisely. So the net result right now seems to be this collision. High-stakes protectionism and debt-financed tax cuts layered directly on top of really aggressive regulatory rollbacks.
And the outcome for you, the listener? Measurable economic anxiety felt across the political spectrum, contrasted directly with official claims of, hidden but unprecedented financial gains from deregulation.
It's a real puzzle for the average person to sort out.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to chew on today. If that estimated $2,300 annual tariff cost is real, and that claimed $3,100 annual deregulation gain is also real, and both are supposedly hitting your wallet simultaneously, are you actually experiencing a net $800 benefit or a net loss because maybe the costs feel more immediate? Or does the fundamentally different nature of these things, one being a direct hit to your monthly bills, the other maybe a future cost avoided or a dispersed benefit, mean that economic success or failure just looks completely different now for every single person, depending on your specific circumstance?